Not all people are the same. Some, from birth, struggle with problems unfamiliar to the majority. Typically, these individuals belong to vulnerable categories that find it difficult to integrate into the world around them. While loved ones often provide support, sometimes the situation is reversed, as in today's case. Jake Lon was born in New York, USA, as the youngest child in the Lon family, which included an older brother and sister. They lived on Long Island and were a fairly wealthy family. Jake was described as a good guy, always interacting with others with respect and politeness, even if they initially did not reciprocate his friendliness. At the age of 5, Jake was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. For the rest of his life, he struggled with this condition, which became especially pronounced at age 15 when he began experiencing mood swings. The teenager often missed classes because he simply couldn't motivate himself to get out of bed. Despite this, Jake had highlights in high school, notably when he was featured on the news for winning a prestigious competition with his iPhone application called Flash Me. However, during this period he was also diagnosed with anxiety and depression. At 17, Jake was hospitalized after a serious incident with his parents. After quarreling, he threatened to commit suicide with a kitchen knife. Rather than checking on him, his parents called an ambulance, leading to his admission to a psychiatric clinic. During this episode, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, characterized by sudden mood swings ranging from deep dark depressions to periods of exhilaration filled with grandiose ideas. Jake graduated from high school in 2012 and planned to attend college, which he succeeded in doing. His parents actively sought help for him, frequently consulting specialists, but the effectiveness of their efforts was limited. By 18, Jake was prescribed around 30 different medications, which led to serious side effects, often feeling worse than the disorders themselves. Some of these medications interacted poorly, further reducing the treatment's effectiveness. During this time, Jake also began drinking alcohol and using crack cocaine. When he entered college, his parents hoped that his condition had improved. Initially it seemed that way, but soon they received an alarming call from the dean, asking why Jake had been missing classes for the past 2 weeks. It turned out he had spent almost all of that time in bed, unable to motivate himself to attend. His depressive state was worsening and he was regularly using illegal drugs. Concerned, his family tried to intervene. At 19, Jake was uninterested in studying or working. He spent all his time procrastinating and having fun. One day, his mother shared her worries with her 40-year-old niece, Pam Bachbinder, a successful psychiatrist in New York. Pam, a well-respected specialist with numerous awards and publications, offered to take Jake in for a while to set up a sort of rehabilitation center at her home. She promised to conduct therapy sessions and monitor his medication intake, believing that a loved one could help more effectively than anyone else. She planned to test him for alcohol and illicit substances if necessary. In return, Pam asked Jake for help with her 1-year-old son, as she worked long hours and could use the assistance. Given their family connection, Jake agreed to this proposal, seeing it as a break from his parents. He thought it would be beneficial to help care for his cousin's 4-year-old son. Pam was a practicing psychiatrist, and her son's father, Michael Weiss, was another well-known psychiatrist. Unfortunately, their marriage was marred by a toxic atmosphere, resulting in a strained relationship marked by frequent disagreements. One day, Pamela was even arrested after she threw a glass at Michael, injuring him and requiring stitches at the hospital. The woman insisted that the couple was at fault for each other's actions. Following another conflict, Michael was arrested. He allegedly threatened her with violence. However, many later expressed doubts about Pamela's statement, believing she was trying to slander her husband. Pamela broke up with Michael in 2009, after which she moved to Greenwich Village in Manhattan. In 2011, the fight for custody of their child began. During this time, she behaved poorly towards her husband, constantly telling their son lies and portraying his father as a terrible person. Pamela willingly spread false and compromising stories to outsiders, clearly trying to turn the child and those around her against him. She aimed to win the custody battle and secure decent alimony. It was later revealed that she used the boy as a spy to gather information about her ex-husband, which she planned to use against him during the trial. By 2012, the couple finally reached an agreement, granting Michael the right to spend weekends with their child. However, one peculiar condition set by Pamela was that Michael purchase a life insurance policy with their son Calder as the beneficiary, while she would be the trustee. Exhausted by the legal battles, Michael agreed to this suspicious condition. The final stages of the custody battle continued when Jake moved into his cousin's house. Just a few weeks later, he admitted that this move had strengthened his connection with his relative. He felt like he was on the right path, as he began to communicate openly with his cousin, sharing secrets and problems. She offered advice, monitored his medication intake, and helped manage the child's care, making life much easier for the boy. Jake believed he was providing significant support, especially after becoming the boy's godfather. He often expressed that his life felt meaningful again, as he was completely absorbed in the boy's well-being and ready to do anything for him. In November 2012, Michael had called her for the entire day for the first time. Excited about finally agreeing with his ex-wife on custody, he planned to take him to kindergarten and then spend the rest of the day together. The day went well, but on the 12th, after returning Calder to his mother, Michael went to his office for his first patient of the day. As he was busy with the patient, he was interrupted by Vova, who arrived at the door looking alarmed, carrying a large bag. Michael recognized him as a man who had moved in with Pamela and was struggling with various mental health issues, though he wasn't sure how things were going. Michael asked Jake to wait outside while he finished with the patient. After a few minutes, Jake remained in the corridor when Dr. Weiss, the patient, inquired about the contents of the bag. According to Jake, it held several documents necessary for Calder's kindergarten, which he claimed to be helping Pamela prepare. Michael doubted the validity of this, as the bag appeared too large to contain just documents. Concerned that his ex-wife might have planted a listening device, he requested that Jake leave the bag outside before entering the office. Jake insisted he couldn't leave the bag unattended due to the fear of theft. Eventually, Michael relented and allowed Jake to bring the bag inside. Once in the office, Jake requested to use the restroom. Immediately upon exiting, he attacked Michael with a sledgehammer. Fortunately, Michael managed to dodge the fatal blow, but Jake struck his shoulder, breaking it. Losing his balance due to the weight of the tool, Jake discarded the sledgehammer and lunged at Michael with a knife. Despite Michael's attempts to defend himself, he sustained multiple injuries. Dr. Weiss, much larger than Jake, eventually managed to gain control of the knife. In the struggle, he remembered giving similar knives to Pamela as part of a set she received last Christmas. Realizing his ex-wife was involved, Michael pushed Jake away and fled into the corridor, calling for help. Jake followed but did not attack further. Bystanders rushed to Michael's aid as he lost consciousness from blood loss, and they immediately called the police and an ambulance. Jake did not attempt to flee. Jake sat in the corridor, bleeding next to a psychiatrist who was weakening right before everyone's eyes. Suddenly, he pulled out his mobile phone and took a selfie with his bloody hands. When the doctors arrived at the scene, they immediately began gathering information about the attack. Since Michael was unconscious, they turned to Jake, who began to lie about what had happened. However, after speaking with neighbors and examining the crime scene, detectives quickly uncovered discrepancies in his story. Meanwhile, both the attacker and his victim were taken to the hospital under police supervision. Forensic scientists retrieved the sledgehammer and knife from Dr. Weiss's office. Upon examining the tools, they found DNA on the handle that matched Jake's. The knife was also analyzed and traced back to Pamela's kitchen set. The police confiscated Jake's large bag, which contained a pack of cigarettes, zip ties, and a hand-drawn map of the building where Michael worked, marking the entrances and exits, along with a line connecting them. The bag was tracked to a store near Pamela's house, and CCTV footage confirmed that Jake had purchased the sledgehammer used in the attack, as well as the zip ties, just the night before. He paid for everything in cash, suggesting he was aware of the impending crime. This purchase coincided with the day Michael was in charge of their child, while Jake prepared to carry out his plan for revenge. Now both men were in the hospital. Jake suffered only minor injuries and, out of fear, received a few stitches before being surprisingly released. Despite his numerous injuries, Michael was not in critical condition. He had lost a lot of blood, but his injuries were not life-threatening. Jake was arrested, but later released on $200,000 bail, and his father's money secured his temporary freedom. He was allowed to stay with his relatives in Miami while awaiting a hearing. Unfortunately, while awaiting trial, Jake's mental health deteriorated. He attempted to take his own life and during discussions with the police claimed that the attack was an act of self-defense. He alleged that Michael had attacked him first with the sledgehammer. However, this made little sense given that Jake had arrived at the scene armed with a heavy tool, purchased just the day before. When his lies fell apart, he confessed to the police, saying that Pamela had manipulated him and turned him against Michael. At the same time, Pamela was presenting herself to the police as a psychiatrist with an impeccable reputation, backed by scientific articles, and as a loving mother. She claimed she was unaware of Jake's plans and suggested that he had simply suffered a mental breakdown. However, detectives quickly began to check Jake's claims. Evidence supporting his story emerged, as it seemed Pamela had a motive for wanting to eliminate her ex-husband. In November 2013, Michael Weiss filed a lawsuit against Pamela and Jake, insisting that his ex-wife had coerced him into taking out a life insurance policy for $1 million, which she intended to use as part of a conspiracy to enrich herself. The timing of events was too coincidental. Jake had moved in during the final stages of the custody battle, and just weeks later the ex-spouses had reached a mutual agreement. Jake's lawyer secured a restraining order against Pamela, claiming it was necessary to protect his client's mental health. Despite the considerable evidence against her, the police did not arrest Pamela or even summon her for questioning. They allowed her to keep her medical license. Although she had orchestrated an attack on her ex-husband, she was ultimately forced to close her practice due to public backlash and online criticism. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. An expert was brought in to analyze the building plans found in Jake's bag, which turned out to be drawn by Pamela. She insisted it was for her cousin to help him find his way to Dr. Weiss's office and pick up Calder if needed. It became clear that she had been in contact with Jake before and after the attack. Following Jake's infamous selfie after the attack, lengthy text conversations revealed that he felt guilty for not completing the task. Pamela even visited Jake in the hospital where he sought help. During this time, he fully admitted his actions and expressed a willingness to face the consequences, regardless of how severe they might be. He told detectives that Pamela had convinced him to kill Michael in order to free her and her son from what she described as a tyrant. Jake became so attached to the boy that he wanted to help save him, claiming he had no idea that Michael's life was insured for a significant amount which Pamela could benefit from. Jake was not worried about money. His family supported him fully. However, Pamela had brainwashed him so thoroughly that he was willing to do anything for her sake. Michael, the victim, actively participated in the legal process, involving the guardianship authorities because he was concerned for his mother's safety and wanted sole custody of their child. Unfortunately, the situation stalled, and even after 2 years, nothing had changed. By 2015, Pamela still lived comfortably at home with her son, sharing custody with Michael as her involvement in the attempted murder had not been proven. Despite the absurdity of the situation, Michael struggled to get any action from the authorities while Jake awaited charges for attempted murder in Miami. During this time, Jake finally received full psychiatric help, and his condition began to improve. He started to truly come to terms with what had happened. He admitted that Pamela had manipulated him into feeling a strong sympathy for her. She had skillfully presented her therapy as a means of helping him, but, in reality, she was methodically turning him against her ex-husband. Jake realized he had become a servant to Pamela, taking care of her child and managing household responsibilities, while she had no real intention of helping him. It dawned on him that she had only wanted to use him for her dubious purposes. As Jake's mental health improved and he gave up his addictions, he recognized his desire to rectify his mistakes. He envisioned starting a family of his own, but he faced the looming threat of years in prison, all due to someone he had once trusted completely. Suspicion grew that Jake and Pamela's relationship was more troubling than merely therapeutic. Their correspondence resembled tender exchanges between newlyweds, and a photograph surfaced showing them lying in bed together. It appeared that Pamela was trying to ensnare Jake in a romantic way to ensure he remained her puppet. Despite these implications, Jake denied any intimate relationship between them, although many doubted his claims. Pamela had systematically turned Jake against Dr. Weiss, much like she had done with her own son. She spun elaborate tales of how Michael had subjected her to physical abuse during their marriage and accused him of trying to take their son away. Gradually, Jake became ready to kill for Pamela, as she persuaded him to consider taking drastic action against her ex-husband. She knew she couldn't physically overpower a strong man like Michael, so she positioned Jake as the ideal candidate for the role of killer. The trial began in March 2016, where the jury heard the full story of the events that transpired on November 12, 2012. Jake recalled how Pamela had woken him up with sweet words, telling him he was her savior. They had breakfast together as she continued her brainwashing. The sledgehammer and zip ties were purchased on November 11th, and the plan was more insidious than anyone had realized. Jake was meant to torture Michael before killing him. Pamela wanted him to suffer, and she even insisted on playing her favorite Beatles song during the act. Before agreeing to commit the crime, Jake had imagined how the act would unfold and felt uneasy about its gruesome nature. Despite Pamela's encouragement, he refused to go to such extremes. While packing his bag, Pamela laughed, anticipating that the day would be much brighter once Dr. Weiss was dead. When Jake entered Michael's office through the service entrance, he was caught on CCTV, showing that he did not attempt to hide his identity. He walked confidently through the corridor but was forced to wait outside as a session was ongoing. In that moment, Jake wrestled with his thoughts. He realized he couldn't face Pamela if he backed out now. There was no turning back. He went through with the attack, insisting he had become a weapon in Pamela's hands, having trusted her as a loved one. The prosecution argued that this did not absolve Jake of guilt, especially since Dr. Weiss had miraculously survived. Jake was evaluated by various psychiatrists, some believing he was completely in control of his actions at the time of the crime, while his defense maintained that Pamela had exerted overwhelming control over him. Despite his wealthy background, which eliminated financial motives, it was clear that Pamela stood to gain from the murder. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found Jake guilty of attempted murder, sentencing him to 9.5 years in prison. Throughout this period, Pamela remained free. However, on October 19, 2017, police attempted to arrest her after she ignored multiple requests to voluntarily surrender. An anonymous tip led them to her location in Massachusetts, where she had packed to flee, likely aiming to escape to Canada. Bail was denied due to the likelihood of her flight risk. On September 7, 2022, 52-year-old Pamela pleaded guilty to charges of attempted murder and first-degree assault to avoid a longer sentence. She later tried to withdraw her plea, claiming she was under the influence of substances and had been mistreated by guards, but her request was rejected. She was sentenced to 11 years in prison and 6 years of parole, and her medical license was finally revoked. Jake remains in prison, scheduled for release in 2025 when he turns 30. He still asserts that he was not himself during the incident and regrets what happened. His parents unconditionally support him, believing that Pamela's manipulation led him to take such drastic actions. They now consider sending Jake to his cousin for treatment to be the worst decision of their lives. Pamela is set to be released in 2028 at the age of 58, still insisting on her innocence. Michael ultimately gained custody of their child. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments and don't forget to like this video. Thanks for watching.